I mean, what motivates me is to tell a story that hasn't been told before. After doing the life we chose, I realized, in talking to Billy D'Elia, who was the head of the Bufalino crime family for many years, the world is very gray. I mean, there is so much going on behind the scenes. I mean, the business dealings that go on in the real world behind the scenes that people are just not aware of. And we're talking about politics, we're talking about business, we're talking about entertainment, we're talking about sports. It's utterly amazing.
That was Matt Birkbeck, investigative journalist and best-selling author. Matt has written acclaimed nonfiction books, including The Life We Chose, The Quiet Dawn, and Deconstructing Sammy, exploring true crime, organized crime, and high-profile investigations. He has also authored the true crime classics, A Beautiful Child and Finding Sharon, both of which inspired the global Netflix documentary phenomenon, Girl in the Picture. Most recently, Matt released his debut novel, The Wicked. This is Harmony Talk, the podcast where dreamers and doers share the stories behind achievement and impact. Each conversation is made possible by AM Skyer, proud sponsor of Harmony Talk and a partner to people and organizations who make communities stronger. I'm your host, Greg Frigoletto. Matt, welcome to Harmony Talk.
Thank you for having me.
It's my absolute pleasure to have you. I have to say, before we dug into this episode, I did, obviously, like you would expect, I would some research into everything that deals with Matt, right? And I have to tell you, what I didn't find were a lot of things dealing with lollipops and unicorns, right? You've done a lot of great work over a long period of time that has dealt with some very serious topics. And we're going to go through all of these things. But one of the things that I really thought right out of the gate, when I knew I was going to be speaking with you, is when you're dealing like you have for a long time with topics ranging from things like murder to corruption, the hidden truths, violence. You've written amazing books about very serious topics, whether it's, The Life We Chose or The Quiet Dawn or A Beautiful Child or, Girl in the Picture, which was actually adapted to be a Netflix movie, which, by the way, I have to say I recently watched. And I don't know if the adaptation is exactly like the book, but I will tell you there were probably 100 times that I went, oh my gosh, I can't believe the twist this just took. But aside from that, and we'll talk more about that, when you're dealing like you have with topics like that are serious, sometimes dark topics, I wonder, when you're an author, when you're an investigative journalist like you have been for so long, what happens emotionally when you're doing that? And do you find as though the stories resonate with you in a way that can become dark, much like the topics that you're covering?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are certain stories that are going to have a profound effect on you. More so, say, with my book, A Beautiful Child, which told just an absolutely terrible story about a young girl who lived a horrendous life, but in dealing with that life was able to succeed at a level that just blew me away. That was just utterly amazing. And that became Girl in the Picture, the Netflix film that we did that came out a couple of years ago. I mean, and there were moments when you're actually doing the book. So, for me, if there's an injustice involved, for me, there are certain points that a story has to hit for me to get into it. It has to be multiple. It has to be multi-layers to a story. And this one had, I mean, there are a million different layers to it. But there were moments in doing that story that just, absolutely disgusted me. And I had to deal with when I interviewed, for folks who are familiar with the stories, this is a book about a young girl who was a brilliant high school student. Her name was Sharon Marshall, lived alone with her father. She was going to go to college, work on a space shuttle, become an aerospace engineer. Turns out, though, everything was a lie. And it wasn't her father. And I interviewed him. He was on death row in prison. And I was there for 4 hours with him. And it was a brutal 4 hours. And I actually came away from that interview. And it was in part because he had showed me some photographs that he was still able to have because he had acted as his attorney during his murder trial. But the photos were just disgusting. He actually took pictures of a girl that he was murdering. Um, and he's trying to explain away that, he wasn't the killer and, pointing to different parts of these disgusting pictures. And yeah, you walk away from something like that and you go, oh my God. And, I remember I called my wife and, explained it to her a bit. But at the end of the day, you have to kind of, okay, you tuck it away, you compartmentalize it, and you push ahead. And you've got to get the story and continue to get the story. That was actually the first interview I did when I did the book. I flew down to Florida and interviewed him on death row. It was amazing. I even got in here to see him, much less get in here by myself. It was just me and him for 4 hours. And fortunately for me, he gave me a lot of his material I was able to copy. That's a whole other story, but, or get photocopies of. But yeah, so yeah, stories do, especially a story like that one. Other books, I dealt with organized crime. Two of my books did, actually three, because my Sammy Davis Jr. book was about Sammy post-death. We get into his entire life, but the whole book was about an investigation into Sammy's life, and part of that dealt with organized crime. You do have, obviously, your emotions do take you into a book. They do guide you to a certain degree. But at the end of the day, you have to remain as objective as possible. I mean, when you do a book, you're going to have a point of view. When you're doing a newspaper article or a magazine piece, it's less of a point of view, personally. And you're following the trail. But yeah, I mean, there are stories that you do where you're put in a situation, and you are feeling it, and you've got to deal with that and then move ahead.
So you have obviously strong roots in investigative journalism, and I want to in just a moment or so kind of get into the actual history of what your work life has looked like. Going back to the Pocono Record and the Morning Call and things like that. But just to stay on this topic for a minute, you had just mentioned that when you're interested in a story, it kind of has to have multiple layers, right? So maybe the story itself kind of motivates you and interests you. But what really are the things that are motivating and interesting to you when you're approaching a story? Because, is it, I've wondered, like, you just talked about, meeting this guy on death row. In the book, one of the books that you wrote about the Mafia, Big Billy, right? Billy
Yeah,
DeLeo.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so you get to see and meet these people. So there has to be some brush that you have, as a journalist, knowing that that's the depth that you're digging. But are there other things that motivate you? Tell me what they are.
I mean, what motivates me is to tell a story that hasn't been told before. Um, and there has to be, um, you're sharing something with folks that they're unaware of. And it could be, digging into, you mentioned the Billy Delia book, The Life We Chose. I went through most of my career. I mean, it took a while. I mean, I kinda it kinda broadened out a bit, but you go into, you think the world's black and white. I mean, some people do. I did. It's black and white with a little gray. After doing the life we chose, I realized, and talking to Billy Delia, who was the head of the Bufalino crime family for many years, the world is very gray. It's a little black, and there's a little white, and everything else is in between. I mean, there was so much going on behind the scenes. That's why that book was, and interviewing him for 2 years, that book was just so fascinating. I mean, the business dealings that go on in the real world behind the scenes that people are just not aware of. And we're talking about politics, we're talking about business, we're talking about entertainment, we're talking about sports. It's utterly amazing. So, if I'm actually, if my curiosity is piqued and I could see, all right, this is a big story. It's a big, broad story I'm going to tell. It touches on so many different facets. That's what interests me. And that's, I think, that the readers, I'm actually doing a service for readers. I'm going to educate them, so to speak, by doing this book. And may hopefully entertain them. But at the same time, they're also going to learn a few things. Um, so in terms of, some of the details I'll put into it, when I look for a new project It can't just be a headline. There has to be a lot behind it. It has to be so much more in terms of depth, in terms of storyline, in terms of characters, and in terms of, for instance, let's go back to A Beautiful Child. It wasn't just the story of this young woman and her so-called father, whose name was Franklin Floyd. I got into the investigators. I dealt with the FBI and Joe Fitzpatrick, who was the FBI agent who you saw in the movie, who led the investigation, initial investigation into her, into who she was, and into her disappearance of her son, whose name was Michael. Um, and how they did it and how they stuck with it over several years. The U.S. attorneys, the assistant U.S. attorneys, and how they had to prosecute them. And then, of course, I'd have to travel around the country and interview the friends who went to school with her, high school with her in Florida, who would then either stayed home or moved away. So I had to go to different states and go visit them and see how this story actually affected them years later, and even the teachers that this girl had. So it has to be something where I'm going to take, it's just different narratives and bring them into one and tell a really good story. Basically, when I do a book, I'm looking for a really great beginning, a really good opening that's going to capture the reader. I maintain the story in the middle, and hopefully I give you, I wrap it up. That's really basically what I look to do.
Yeah, so it seems to me like you're kind of forever chasing the truth when you're digging into these different stories. And as we're finding out from the truth that you're telling in your stories, the truth can be dark. There's actually a movie, one of my favorite movies ever, not to get sidetracked here, but it was called A Few Good Men. And in it,
Yeah.
Tom Cruise is blasting away Jack Nicholson. And, Jack Nicholson's character says, "You can't handle the truth." That was a bad Jack Nicholson impression right there. However, the truth is, most people probably can't handle the truth, and these
No.
things that you're talking about are very serious. But when it comes to the truth, right? So now you've dug deep, you have your facts, and somewhere you want to make sure you're demonstrating and putting things down that are not fiction. These are details that are proven. When do you get to a point when you know this is a detail that I've vetted enough to have it become a fact?
In an interview with someone who experienced it themselves from documents. I go through a million documents, particularly when I do a book. I'll read through them and I look for. I mean, I'll go through court documents, thousands of pages, and I'm looking for that one nugget. I'll go through it. I'll go through it. I'll go through it. I'll be going through it for hours and hours and hours, and then, bang, something just pops out and you go, oh my god. And it's just you take it and it it ends up in the book. So you just it's just reporting. It's basic reporting. 101. You follow the road. You may develop, as an investigative reporter, even in my newspaper days and magazine days, I might in my mind think of a narrative. Like I might think the story's going one way and I might continue to go that way. But I keep it open. Obviously, things could change, And at the end of the day, what I really want to do is make sure that it's an accurate portrayal, especially when it comes to nonfiction. It has to be accurate. I don't want someone coming back to me at the end of the day and saying that didn't happen, or that wasn't true, or whatever. It's very important to me to make sure that it was accurate, and it is important to me. For Billy D'Elia, for instance, I interviewed him for over 2 years, and like I said, he was a member of Organized Crime. I knew a lot of people. When I started those interviews, I wasn't sure if I was going to be a friend or foe, so to speak. It took a while before we hit our stride, but I became convinced after talking with him, and then he would tell me stuff, and I go back and look it up. He was on the level. I mean, it wasn't anything he told me that I had to go back to him and say, "Hey, Billy, I think you lied to me." You know, he didn't. So, it's just a combination. I've been doing this for a long time, so you kind of know when someone's being truthful to you and when they're not. And when they are, then they become a better source for you and only, help the project that you're working on.
When you're speaking to like a Billy D'Elia, and he's telling you, like you said, at this point he's an open book. He thinks he might have nothing to lose. So he's telling you that the story, which really at some point in time, that story couldn't be told, right? So as you're hearing this and you're recording and getting things down and you know this story is going to come out and you're going to be the guy that penned it, is there some apprehension that you have about getting it out? And aside from entertaining people and having maybe the truth be told, do you have any concern or reservations about that level of truth about a topic like that?
No, actually get excited about it. My job is to interview, I do narrative nonfiction. So I'm not just writing down details and facts. I'm creating a story out of it. It's a true story, but I want it to be as if someone's reading fiction where they're entertained. Um, and Billy, he wasn't an open book when I first started talking to him. He had never spoken to anyone before, much less a journalist, but he wouldn't the FBI, for folks who aren't familiar with him, he was the heir to the Bufalino crime family, one of the most powerful families in the country. Russell Bufalino led that family out of Pennsylvania, although he spent a lot of his time in New York. Billy became his so-called son and heir, and he had spent 30 years with Bufalino. And I had written about Billy when I was a newspaper reporter in the early 2000s and before he went to prison. And so I knew a bit about him. He had someone reach out to me right after COVID hit in 2020, and because he was upset, with the portrayal of Russell Bufalino in the movie The Irishman, in which
Mm.
Joe Pesci played him. And he was also upset about a couple of other things, and he basically wanted to straighten out the record. When I got the email, my instinct was to jump up and say, "Yeah, I know who Billy was. He never spoke to anyone. This is gonna be great." Well, and also the big story with Billy Delir and Russell Bufalino was involved in the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa, and every law enforcement agency in the country tried to talk to Billy about that. Billy wouldn't talk to them. So for me, it promised, hopefully, an explanation of what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. So, but I thought then part of me was thinking, "Well, wait a minute, maybe he's upset with something I wrote about him." Um, so the first few meetings with Bill, I have to admit I was somewhat, let's say, a little nerved out,
Yeah.
to the point where I would tell my wife, "All right, listen, I'm at the house. Here I am." I gave her the address, I walked in, I'm sitting, they had me sit, and in my back there was, it was in actually Bufalino's old home that, had been given to Billy D'Elia's son, and behind me there was stairs to a downstairs room where Bufalino had held meetings and whatnot. It was kept as if it was out of the 1960s and 70s. And I kept turning around thinking maybe someone might pop up. I
Yeah.
mean, that's how I was thinking.
Mhm.
So, as it turned out though, those fears were unwarranted. It turned Billy was, I mean, he was really great to work with. It took 3 months to get him also to actually start really talking. I mean, he would just talk about the happy times with Bufalino. He wasn't getting into any of the big details, and I had to basically say, "Bill, we're gonna stop right here unless we start getting into the meat and potatoes of your story. You're gonna have to tell me everything." And he basically did. The only thing he said he wouldn't talk to me about would be violence in that, he didn't he served 4 years in prison, and he didn't wanna give prosecutors any reason to send him back. And not that he was involved in anything. I don't know if he ever murdered anybody or gave an order to murder anyone. He was the head of a crime family for many years, so but I don't know for sure. But that was the only topic that was off limits, everything else we got into, and so, yeah, so when the book is done and I'll send it to the publisher, I'm just waiting for their response to, "What do you guys think?" And fortunately, the responses whenever I've written a book has always been, you know, they're very, very happy with it. Um, so, but I do get when I know I'm on a project and I may be able to dig into it, that just gets me going.
Yeah, you talked a little bit before about, you have to be interested in the story and a lot of the topics you've covered, and you've been doing it long before they became like national interests. But the mafia, for example, organized crime, unsolved murder mysteries, let's say, or abductions. These are things that Americans can't seem to consume enough of, right? And as you were just talking about your interviews with Billy. Is there a period of time where you have to work to develop the trust for the story to be told? You know, you're walking into a room and whether it's him or any of the other stories you've covered where you're sitting across from somebody that hasn't said this before. How do you work on that trust development?
That's probably the biggest thing is developing that trust. And it took with Billy, it took a while. Billy's built not to, I mean, look at where he came from in terms of his career, not necessarily trust people. I think we eventually developed a good rapport. Um, we still talk, to this day. Um, so it took a while to do that. But then with everyone that I talk to, listen, my goal, and I always tell people when I do, even my investigative reporting, okay, everything I hear doesn't mean it's going to be in a book or in a magazine piece or in my newspaper days, especially if it's an official. I did reporting in the early 2000s and when Pennsylvania brought casino gambling to the state, which turned out to be nothing but a huge scam. Governor Ed Rendell, he had people, they would talk about casinos in Pennsylvania for years. They come up with this plan. The only way to do it is to get the state legislature involved. We were talking before about black and white and gray. This was like, talk about gray. This was like underworld gray. The legislature was involved, but what blew me away, the way they had set it up was that, and they had folks that they knew, they had favorite folks that were going to get casino licenses. But in order to do that, and I found this out, it took me a couple of years to figure it out, and I wrote about it. They actually got the state Supreme Court involved in that they knew there would be lawsuits because they had their favorite candidates. And this was actually how I got involved in reporting on the Bufalino crime family because one of their associates who became a billionaire in the Scranton area was a favorite candidate to get a casino in the Poconos in
Mhm.
northeastern Pennsylvania. And the only way to get this guy through was to basically not only change the rules on the vetting rules on how to, for someone with his history, but also to get the state Supreme Court to back you up. They had there was a civil suit filed against the gaming board. The Bufalino guy actually got the casino and his family owns it to this day. The company that he was up against, which was a really big company, a big gaming company. And they lost, and and they went to the state Supreme Court. And they said, "No, we're going to give it to the guy from Scranton." And the reasoning made no sense. I remember in the newsroom, I was at the morning call, and we're in the newsroom we're reading this, and I'm like, "This makes no sense." It's like the other proposal was far superior. Why is this guy getting it? And then we knew why. Billy was part of it. Billy said the guy paid like he took $4 million and spread it out to who he had to, and there you go.
It's kinda like when we were just talking before whether, something's fact or fiction. When you're coming up with these details, it falls into the category of, you can't even make this stuff up.
My editors, we're talking about sources, but my editors didn't even believe me when I would tell them because I developed a source. So we're talking about sources and people trusting you. He was the former deputy, his second in command, a former deputy commissioner of the Pennsylvania State Police who saw what I was writing. I just started this coverage, and he actually reached out to me, and I had to meet him a couple of times, and he had to basically feel he could trust me, and he did. And he gave me information that not only blew me away, blew my editors away to the point where we went through arguments, really big arguments. I was actually in California. I was working on my Sammy Davis Jr. book too at the time. This was like 2007. And I'm like yelling at them because I'm defending my source. I mean, I'm like, he's the former deputy commissioner. He just retired. He's telling us what's going on. Thankfully, editors do what they have to do. That's their job is to be cautious and push their reporters. So I got it. I mean, me being the reporter, I got to push too. But they actually bought into it. We ran the stories and they were fantastic. They were like front page, big headline stories, blew everyone away. The guy from Scranton ended up going to prison. No, I'm sorry. He was charged. He didn't go to prison. He was charged and later cut a deal. But, it's really about just getting back to the original question. It's really about just getting people to trust you, which is the most important thing. Yeah, in doing something like this.
Well, we've all met people that have, I've met people and like you have, and I'm sure we all have, where, your immediate takeaway is, man, I don't trust that guy. Right. So what do you think? What is it that you do? What's the secret sauce? What's the personality trait? What is it that you think have people trusting you?
Just, I mean, talking like we're talking now and explaining my motives to them, and that if it's someone that's really cautious, it's fearful. If someone's fearful of getting fired or something, I'm not going to push it. I'm not going to go run and get the story, and then this person who's trusting me may lose his job or something else.
I would imagine you have to be a slave to your word, right?
Oh, and I am. It's the most important thing you have. Like you can't. I mean, you lose that, and you lose everything. So, there were stories I haven't written, because I kept my word, and I'm fine with that. I mean, that's the most important thing.
I would imagine that is a lot of what trust is that's developed around you. And I wonder too, when you're digging into these stories, do you ever get to a point when you think, man, at some point I'm going to have to stop digging because I'm not sure exactly where this is going to end? Like it just gets to be unraveling and the layers of the onion are so voluminous that you just think, I have to make it concise. So at some point, so I mean, tell me about that.
That does happen where it's too much, and you're getting too much information, and you need to just stick to the story that you're doing. I mean, a book affords you the opportunity to do a deep dive, right? But even in doing a deep dive, you don't want to go 6 miles deep. You don't want to just get the reader completely confused and give up on what you're writing. Um, you've got a narrative you've developed. You're not looking to throw everything that you got into the book. You are looking to get the really good big headline pieces in the book. You're looking to get the explanatory information into the book. Other stuff, I mean, it might be interesting, but it may not add to the book. Some folks will do it. My books have been around 300 pages. I don't go 4, 5, 600 pages. I don't do it. Some writers do it and they could do it well. That's not me. I'm telling a story. I've always maintained, and I've told people before, I'm trying to write a book that's going to be kind of like going to a 2-hour movie. It'll take you longer than 2 hours to read it. In probably a couple of sittings. Um, but I'm not looking to confuse people. I want them to read it, feel it, understand it, and come away from it with some kind of an emotion.
That's kind of a little bit of a segue into what you've just done, which is much different than anything you've done in the past. Right now, you're getting into the premise of a novel. Your novel, The Wicked, came out, fiction, right? So this is much different in that there's no fact checking necessary when you're writing fiction. And if you could tell me a little bit about that leap, what what motivated you to do it, what's different about it, and where maybe you're going to go from here in that arena.
Actually, there was a little fact checking involved because there's some historical fiction that's in there. But it's a story that I actually thought about 20 years ago. Um, when I was a newspaper reporter at the Morning Call. My career is kind of weird. It's not the traditional path. I started out, I'm from New York. I started out at a radio station in New York, WNEW, had a really great newsroom. I was a desk assistant. It served both the AM and FM stations. If you're from New York, you know some of the big time
Mhm.
DJs that were there at the time and the great newscasters. And then I went to magazines. I worked at Rolling Stone and Entertainment Weekly as a so-called fact checker slash reporter. And then I moved to Pennsylvania, and I didn't want to commute anymore. Plus, I wasn't really doing the kind of work that I really wanted to do. So I ended up doing was I took a job at the local newspaper. It's called the Pocono Record, which was actually a really good paper, and it was owned by Dow Jones, the Wall Street Journal. And then I'd also was working as a correspondent for People Magazine. So I was working during the day for the record, and that's where I actually started to um, write investigative pieces. And then with People, my bureau chief in New York would call me and say, "We need you to run to Boston," or "We need you to go," we covered all of the Northeast US. But I did mostly human, interest, um, and crime stories for people. I didn't like doing the celebrity stuff. And, I was able to kinda, you know, dig my teeth into some stories there, such as the Durst story, which was my first book. But jumping ahead to so I went to the morning call after I wrote A Beautiful Child, um, and I was in this town, Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, which is a really cool town in the middle of a very depressed area. It was the mining capital, and it's about 70 miles northwest of Philadelphia. And it was the mining capital of the US in the 1800s, and it's also, for folks who may remember, the Molly Maguires. There was a movie with Sean Connery, the Molly
Mhm.
Maguires, and these were miners that ultimately met their demise. They were executed, um, for killing several people, including police officers, but their story was one about injustice. The mine companies treated the miners poorly. They were mostly Irish and Welsh and Scottish. And this town just fascinated me because it was a tourist attraction. It was something out of a just a completely different time period. And I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, and I thought about it over the years. I came up with the story. Plus, what the most important thing was, my first two books didn't have endings. A Deadly Secret on Robert Durst, who was a serial killer, and then A Beautiful Child. I didn't have the ending. I went into A Beautiful Child and wanted to identify Sharon Marshall and didn't quite do it by the time the book came out. We ended up doing it years later. So my goal in doing fiction was to have a book with a really great ending. And then, I just got busy and busy over the years. And then it was like around 2019. And my wife actually was the one that pushed me to do it. She's like, because she loved the story and said, "You should write it." And I did. I ended up writing it. And I really enjoyed the process of it and creating this story. I did go back. I did have to make sure that some details were correct. Um, but I felt free in terms, I wasn't restrained, so to speak, by the facts of a story like I am with nonfiction. So, I really enjoy doing it, and I think it's something that I do wanna pursue, some more.
Yeah, and for sure, that story, The Wicked, is kind of in your lane in regard to, the investigative reporting and the type of story it is, and boy, I have to tell you, time has gone so fast that we really are going to have to wrap it up here, but I do have 2 very quick things that I wanna ask you. The first would be, so, Harmony Talk is all about stories, it's all about people, right? And you've done a great job telling us your story today, but with your life's work, in dealing with people, and especially in the types of ways that you've dealt with people, do you feel as though your work has made you more cynical or compassionate in how you view people?
That's a really good question because I'm both. I've become I've become I've become more cynical, particularly today. I particularly with the media. I'm very cynical about my own profession. I think we do a really bad job, for instance. Um, a terrible job in reporting, and we become far too political. Um, and then, though, I always had empathy. That's the one thing that a reporter does need to have, is empathy in terms of trying to understand the people and motivations and why people do what they do, particularly when you do a book. Um, so I think both. It just depends where I'm at with what I'm writing about and who I'm talking to. But the empathy part of it, the older you get, I mean, naturally you do get a little bit more cynical because you know more. Um, and then for me, though, it was something where, the empathy part of it, though, is what drives you. Being cynical doesn't drive you. Having empathy for people and trying to understand their stories is what actually does drive you, and gets you to start questioning things. So, both, to be honest.
And I would say The Girl in the Picture, which is the movie adaptation of your book, you didn't have closure when you wrote the book, but and I'm hoping that the documentary portrayed it correctly. But you talk about the empathy piece and the compassion piece. For you personally, having chased that story for a long time, there must have been great satisfaction in that closure.
Journalistically, it was just, it was one of the high points of my career because we kept on. I did something I never do. Like, typically, I write a story and then albeit I'll move on. In this case, along with Joe Fitzpatrick, the FBI agent, we stayed in touch, and as well as and as well as other people, and kept the story alive. And then readers kept the story alive. And then by 2014, 10 years after the book came out, um, with the help of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and they were great, and the FBI, were able to find her identity. Actually, FBI did a great job. Um, and then subsequently from that, found her real family. I
Yeah.
was able to go back to Oklahoma and lay down a new tombstone with her real name, which is in the film. Um,
It
and
actually
then
it was kinda mad, I have to tell you, when I was watching it, I thought, "Geez, this Matt Birkbeck guy, he actually does have a soft spot."
I know that could be surprising to some people. Um, but no, it was one thing I wanted to do. I really wanted to do that.
Yeah.
And the memorial that we had, people came from all over the country that knew her. It was a testament to the young woman who we knew as Sharon Marshall, but whose real name is Suzanne Savakis. And if your listeners and viewers haven't seen the film, it's on Netflix. It's Girl in the Picture, and you should see it because it's a horrific story, but at the end, it's a good story. And I had great partners in doing it, producers, the director, Sky Borgman did a terrific job. And Netflix was just fantastic to work with. They were amazing.
I mean, it was so well done, Matt, I have to tell you, I was blown away by the quality of the production of the whole thing.
Yeah, we did. We traveled all over the country during COVID to film, all the interviews and whatnot. In terms of putting it together during the editing process, early on, it was kind of difficult. At the end of the day, we kind of just followed the books. We told the first part, the first hour or so is the first book, A Beautiful Child. I did a second book called Finding Sharon, which basically brought us up to date after the first book came out. And that was the last half of the film where I enter it. But it was a really great project in terms of doing it. When Netflix told us the day after it came out in July of 2022, they said, "Congratulations, you're our number one movie in the world." I was floored.
Yeah.
I mean, no one had those kind of expectations. But again, it was a testament to the story. It was a testament to the young woman, Sharon Marshall. And it was also to the people that, I worked with, who helped make the film. I mean, they were all just great. So,
Yeah, it was great, and, I would encourage anybody that's listening to not only watch that film, but to check out any of the books you've written. Speaking of which, your most recent, The Wicked, we would encourage people to get into that, and my last question for you is, so we've talked a lot about the types of stories you like. Do you ever envision yourself, if you continue to go down the path of fiction, to write stories that are not in your lane, that are going to challenge you to be completely outside of your comfort zone?
yeah, I would. I'm actually doing something. I'm considering a nonfiction book that I haven't tackled before, which I unfortunately can't get into right now. But I'm facing that kind of issue, so to speak. So yeah, I would. That said, in some discussions I've had with people, the best advice is to write what you know. So which is kind of where I'm kind of leaning towards. I would consider anything, but I'd have to, for the most part, kind of stick with my skill set and what I'm good at. So, but we'll see.
Well, I guess that's a good way to end it for the future authors and journalists that are out there. Is an important lesson to know from Matt Birkbeck. Write what you know, because when you do, clearly, as you've demonstrated, there's passion and there's a real art behind it. And we appreciate the work that you do and spending time with us today, Matt.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks. Thanks for listening to Harmony Talk, where dreamers and doers show us what's possible when wonder and imagination meet grit. Know someone whose story deserves the spotlight? Nominate a guest at harmonytalkpodcast@gmail.com and help us highlight more extraordinary voices. A big thanks to our sponsor, AM Skyer, for supporting conversations that bring stories to life. And thank you to Matt Birkbeck for joining us today. You can find out more information on Matt at his website at mattbirkbeck.com or on his socials at matt.birkbeck.author. I encourage all of you to pick up any of Matt's work, especially the most recent book, The Wicked. Until next time, I'm Greg Frigoletto. Keep dreaming, keep doing, and own your next chapter.